Hey guys, my name is Saib and welcome to another episode of this Canvas game development series. In this episode, we're not going to build another game, we're going to take our games into the next level with a new library or a new rendering engine that's called PixiJS. And this PixiJS is an extremely fast 2D rendering engine that has full WebGL support. WebGL, if you're not familiar with it, we've mentioned it in the first episode. It's just a JavaScript API that's used to render high performance interactive 3D and 2D graphics, and it can be used only in an HTML5 Canvas element. And WebGL is based on OpenGL embedded system specification. OpenGL is an API, another API that is simply allows us to interact with the GPU, which is the graphics card, in order to achieve hardware accelerated graphics, which means much faster than the canvas drawing API. And yeah, but this PixiJS also falls back to HTML5 Canvas. We can use the canvas drawing API as well as the WebGL. Okay, so as I said, PixiJS we use in order to display and animate and manage interactive graphics so that it's easy for us. It's more easily than doing everything manually or with vanilla JavaScript. We use a predefined functions and methods and objects. So we use the Pixi's API to call all of Pixi's objects and methods that ease our work into games. And we're gonna so these two upcoming episodes are just gonna be about PixiJS, an introduction to it and how we can use it, and then we're gonna build a game that is on the next level than the dice and the bong game. So yeah, it's all about making games, whether you use the easy way or the hard way. It's all about making games that are fun, and I went to PixiJS because I want to focus more on the game design and how to make a game much easier to play with and much more visually rich graphics, so that it's more fun even to the player. So yeah, so now I'm gonna help you set up PixiJS from start using it. So the first thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to go to PixiJS.com. I'm going to leave a reference to that in the description, and then we're going to click on download so that it takes us to the GitHub page. Now, as of this time of this video, this is the latest version of PixiJS, which is 6.4.2. Well, what we're going to do is only going to take the minified version of PixiJS, which is that one. Still, you can use the non-minified or the not minified one, but the minified one is much faster, and it loads it's not much, it's slightly faster, and it's just yeah, it loads faster, so that's why we're gonna use the minified one. But you're free to use the non-minified one, it's fine. So you're gonna click on that and you're gonna save link as, and you're just gonna save it in any location that you have. I already downloaded that one, it's in my external libs in here, it's PixiJS, and I have the two versions, but I'm gonna use the minified one. Okay, so yeah, now we downloaded it. What we're gonna do exactly is we're gonna go to the HTML document that we have. I didn't change anything, I just removed the type from our link one and from the script one, since it's not really necessary in HTML5. So yeah, okay, now let's just call this PixiJS, and then I added the description meta tag and an author one. You can add them, it's fine. Now we have to link, or we have to include our minified version, which is in the external libs in here, which is the minified one, simply by calling the script tag. So I'm gonna call the script again above my original script.js, which is just empty now. So I'm gonna call it, and then I'm gonna specify a source, and now I'm just gonna go to the minified versions. I'm gonna include that one, and I'm gonna close the tag. Now, PixiJS, if I try to click on Control and on it, you can see that it actually opens, so you can make sure that this is the right location. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is simply we're gonna test and see if this Pixi minified.js is actually working. So we can go to script.js. I'm just gonna remove that, and no need now for the canvas drawing API. PixiJS is gonna help us set everything. I'm gonna go with you over from basics until we actually be familiar with all of the methods and the objects in PixiJS that we can use in order to make games. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is I'm just gonna console log and I'm just gonna say Pixi, just to check that this is actually working, and then I'm gonna go live, and then okay. Now if I went to the console to inspect, since I console log, I can see an object which is that one, which means that PixiJS is actually working. So I don't know if I'm just refresh that one. Okay, this is the object, so everything is working just fine. Now if you want to check that one, which is simply div tools failed to load source maps, you can actually remove that by going to settings, and settings right here, and just disable the source maps, since Chrome enables them by default, and also the CSS source maps. You can just remove them, and you're gonna just refresh everything, the warning won't be there. So yeah, now this is the object which specifies that Pixi is actually working fine. And yeah, now we set up PixiJS. Now we need to set up our canvas, and this is done simply by going through some steps. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about a renderer. Now Pixi's used a renderer since to render things. Okay, so let's set up this renderer simply by going let. We're gonna use let to define a variable. I'm gonna call it renderer that way, and then I'm gonna use Pixi's API to access its functionality, as I said, and its objects with all of the methods. And then I'm gonna click on the dot, and I'm just gonna say auto detect render like that. And now I'm gonna specify the size of our canvas. So I'm gonna make it 800 by 600 for instance. Now this auto detect render simply chooses whether the renderer that's used is the canvas drawing API or the WebGL. And by default it's gonna take WebGL, since it's much faster, since it's GPU accelerated, which means that it uses the graphical processing unit in order to achieve hardware accelerated, since it's just based on the OpenGL specification that I told you about, the embedded system one. So yeah, it figures out whether to use the canvas drawing API or the OpenGL, the WebGL, sorry. But now for that one, by default it's gonna take WebGL, since it's much faster. But we can actually change that by invoicing to use a certain renderer, and this is simply done by, I can just say render for instance that way, change the define for that one, and you can just say new and go to Pixi, and you can just say canvas render like that, and you specify the size of our canvas that way. Or simply if you want to use the WebGL, you can just say WebGL render that way. And okay, but I'm gonna leave it to the auto detect one, and we're gonna use the WebGL since it's much faster. Don't worry, we're not gonna go into the details of WebGL. This series is not about the WebGL technology, we're not gonna go over that. So yeah, but we're gonna use it as a render in our Pixi one. Pixi uses it, so yeah, we're gonna use Pixi, and we're gonna use it in order to actually achieve what we want to make, which is games or any interactive graphics in web. So yeah, so now we have a render. The other things that we need to do, by now I think you noticed that I didn't add a canvas tag in here, since I'm gonna let Pixi takes care of everything. So what we're gonna do now is simply I'm gonna go to document, use the document object of the DOM. We've talked about document in the first episode. And then I'm gonna go to the body, and then I'm just gonna append a child. And this appended child I'm gonna call the render.view. This render.view is simply just a canvas, a plain canvas element that's gonna be added in the document body in here. So yeah. Okay, now our render is actually working, but we have a render but nothing to render from. You can see nothing actually happened in here. And why is that? Because we have something that's called, we need something that's called a container object. This container object, we call it stage, we can call it root as well. And simply it's just, think of it as a container with all of the things that you want Pixi to display for you. So I'm just gonna say let stage, and I'm just gonna say new Pixi.container. That way. Now if we have our container, which is simply every new object or every new actor in our game, we're gonna add it into this stage container so that Pixi actually displays it, since the renderer only renders a thing at a time. So I'm just say render.render, and I'm gonna call it stage. So the renderer is gonna render stage, and this stage is gonna have all of the objects that we need, such as the player, such as the field, and everything. I hope that makes sense. It's just a container for all of the objects, all of the actors in our game. So if we check now for the PixiJS, we can see a canvas of size 800 by 600, which is exactly what we wanted. And as you can see, the canvas tag is invoked by Pixi, since we're using actually document event child in the render view, which is just, as I said, a canvas element, a tag. Okay, so simply that is how we set up PixiJS, and we set up our canvas using PixiJS. This is, we're using, I think, WebGL renderer. As I said, the auto detect one chooses whether the WebGL or the canvas drawing API, but by default it takes the WebGL. So now let's talk about some of the things that we can edit in here. So as I said, this render view is just a plain canvas tag, which is the canvas tag that's invoked in the body. So we can style it the same way that we style the canvas. So I'm just gonna say render view dot view. I can just say style and border, same as any element of HTML, and I can give it a, say, 2 pixels for instance. You can say dashed, and we can give it a white. This works fine. Now if I saved, you can see now that we have, see this Pixi thing in our console. I think because it's not, okay, let's call it, let's give it a red for instance, so that actually it's visible. Yeah, now we can see it. It's a red dashed stroke or a border around our canvas. And if we want to change the background of the canvas, we can go to the renderer and we can specify background color. Now this has to be a hex value, same as we're using the hash, but in here, since we're using hex, we'll use something that's 0x. It's just a literal for the hex code or hex value. So, but it's the same values as the one we went in colors episode. It's the same. So if I want red, I can just say FF00. We're giving the highest to the red channel, the FF, and I can save. Now we're gonna see a red canvas that way. So as I said, this should be hex. You can search for the colors in hex for instance, and you can have everything in hex like that. Choose it, but also not the hash. You can use the 0x as in here. So yeah, okay, that's related to styling the border of the canvas and everything. As I said, this render view is the same as it's equivalent to the canvas tag or element, so you can style it the same way that we do with any HTML document using the style border, or you can just access any of other properties of the style. Okay, so now let's talk about the last thing that we're gonna go over, which is let's try to load something on, draw a sprite or an image on this canvas to see that it's actually working. Now I want to go over the sprites and all of the things that we can make with images or sprites in the next episode, but I thought we should just show you exactly how Pixis work. I'm not gonna go into the details now, but don't worry, the next episode is gonna go into the details of drawing into a canvas using Pixi for sprites, or we can use a tile map for instance to pick some images from it. So yeah, okay, the first thing that we're gonna do in here is something that's called, Pixi has a loader which loads images before we actually draw them, because WebGL, a ready image in WebGL is called texture, so we have to convert our normal image to a texture, and then we can actually render that. So simply I can just call the render, I can just say const loader for instance, and I can say new Pixi.loader like that, and now I can call the loader and I can just say add. Now I'm gonna add the any image, so I can go to the assets. I have a spaceship one, so I'm gonna use the spaceship again. I'm gonna go to the assets and forward and spaceship.png like that. Now I'm gonna use the chain methods, which means that this method is gonna be implemented then the other one, and this is a way we can do in JavaScript if you're familiar with it or not. It's called the chain methods. So each method is gonna be implemented, executed in sequence from the left to the right that way. So I'm gonna add it, and then I'm gonna load setup, or any function. I just call it setup. So now setup for that like that. So once this image actually gets loaded, we're gonna load the setup function. Now that we actually loaded this image, we're gonna make a sprite object or a sprite instantiation of the sprite class. As you can see, if you noticed in here, that every method of the Pixi's one, or each class, starts with a capital letter, which means that it's a class of the Pixi's API, and we use the new one to make an instantiation of this class, which makes it a stage object. I hope you're familiar with the object-oriented programming, since we use the new in order to make this is a constructor which constructs an object, which is simply just an instantiation of this class. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now let's go into actually making this. So I'm gonna go spaceship, and I'm just gonna call it now we have to call the new pixi.sprite like that, and now we're gonna pass into the sprite. As I said, the sprite in our case in here is just an image. Don't be confused with the sprite as the sprites that we've done in the sprites episode, since it's not. Sprite is just a 2D visual, whether that we can actually control with code, whether the position or the size or anything. But we have in here is just a plain or normal image, which is considered as a sprite in our case, since it's just a 2D visual. It's not supposed to be moving or and we can actually make a sprite from a tile map that we're gonna go over in the next episode. But so now what we're gonna have to do is simply we're gonna call the loader, and we're gonna go into the resources, since this loader adds this image into something that's called a texture cache, and this texture cache it's just a cache that saves or stores all of the images as textures. So resources, and I can access this one by using this bracket like that, the rectangle bracket, so I don't know what they're called. Okay, and now we can just copy the same as that, and as I said, it should be converted into a texture, so we just say texture like that. So this sprite now is just an image texture, not a normal image in its PNG format, since as I said, WebGL ready image, it's just called a texture. Okay, the same goes to OpenGL, but if you're not familiar with any of those two, you just know that an image has to be converted into a texture in order to be rendered in WebGL. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is simply just remove that stage. Now we're gonna add this sprite into our stage, and this is simply done by calling the add child like that, and then I'm gonna call spaceship, and then I'm gonna render stage. So now I hope that makes sense. The render stage, and this stage is a container object. Every Pixi's application should have at least one container, or just one container, which contains all of the things in our game. So now if we checked, we can see this sprites actually showed up, since we added this spaceship object, which is the sprite object, into a stage, and we can add as many childs to the stage as we want. It's gonna be a list of objects in stage, and all of them are gonna be rendered, since renders only render stage, and all of the objects are in stage. I hope that makes sense, because I don't want to confuse you, as Pixi is really not that difficult. It's just simple, but you have to be familiar with the syntax of it, and with the methods and the classes of it. So and the objects of Pixi. So and now if we want, we can actually change the, say, spaceship.x, specify the x position for the spaceship, and we can say .y and say 200 as well. Now if we saved, you can see it actually moving. We can specify the width and height. You can just say width 200, for instance, gonna be so big, and height 50. And we can scale it the same as in the transformation matrix that we've talked about in a different episode, in the transformation one. So if I want to scale this one down to its half size, I can just say scale.x, or simply just set. We can use x and y like that, or we can use set and with two values in here, the x and y. So I can just say 0.5, 0.5, same as the canvas drawing API. This will scale this image down by its half size, 50% size. The same goes if I want to double the size. I can go 2 that way, like that. And if it's gonna be the same, it's gonna be 1, same. Yeah. The same goes if I want to apply the rotation to this sprite. So I can just say space. Let's pick up an angle. So I'm gonna make an angle. It's gonna be in radians, since, as I said, radians is an easier way to deal with rotations, since in terms of pi. So if I want to convert a degree to a radian, I can just specify degrees in here, multiplied by math.pi over 180, like that. So I can just say let degrees, for instance, I want this to be upside down, so it's gonna be 880. So I want just to rotate this by 180 degrees. So I can just say now spaceship, which is a sprite object, and I'm just gonna say rotate or rotation, since this is actually and I'm just gonna pass in the angles and radians like this. Now first you can see that it's upside down. We can also change the anchor, since you know the anchor is just the starting point of this image. It's on the top left. We can make it in the center simply by specifying spaceship dot anchor dot x. You can make it like this, and spaceship anchor dot y, make it like that, 0.5, so that it's actually in the center. Okay, this is too much details. I'm gonna make a different episode for dealing with sprites and other, if we want to load any sprite either from a tile set or a tile map, or just a simple image like this one, like the spaceship one, or we can use the sprite like that. I'm gonna go over all of the properties of the sprites and draw them, the position, the size, the rotation, the scaling, transformation in general, into the next episode. And yeah, I hope this is a good introduction to what we can do with Pixi, as it's much faster since it uses OpenGL. It has the full OpenGL support, but also falls down to Canvas API, the drawing API. So yeah, I hope this makes sense, and we're gonna use Pixi in order to make games that are on the next level, that are not basic, so that we don't have to deal with every aspect, so we can focus on the game design and on the gameplay as well. So I hope this makes sense, and I'll see you in the next episode.